everyone. Good evening. How's everyone doing tonight? Good. Well, welcome to our second of the year, 2023-24 year of our Jacobson Family Sustainable Impact Lecture Series. And we're so really delighted to have this exciting panel, really looking at the intersection between AI and climate change. And it was because of you, I believe, we had a number of comments from many of our fans wanting this topic, really wanting to dig deep into this area. And so really a pleasure to have you with us this evening for this topic. We have people also on Zoom too as well. And so the format of the panel will be about 40 minutes of discussion with our panelists and moderator. And then we'll follow it up with some Q&A for both in person here, but also on our Zoomies too as well, so they have some questions too. So I'll go ahead and just kick this off. And we have a fabulous panel tonight. I'll introduce first, of course, and then we'll go into the panel. But first, of course, a moderator, a wonderful moderator, coming over here from Viterbi over to Marshall School of Business. So Kelly Sanders, he is Associate Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the USC Viterbi School of Engineering, and also the Director of the MS in Green Technologies. So give him a hand before him, and we'll also introduce the tech.
All right. Well, it is good to see so many people here. It's good to see some familiar faces. Again, my name is Kelly Sanders. I'm Associate Professor over in the School of Engineering. I'm in Civil and Environmental Engineering. And my research, just in case students are interested in talking later, I do a lot of research at the intersection of energy, water, and climate. But with that, we're going to stop there with me because we have some excellent and distinguished panelists here. So it's really my honor to introduce Keith Gipson, who is the CTO and CEO of Facil.ai, and he's going to tell us about that. And then we have Sabrina Williams, who's the CEO and founder of So why don't you go ahead and just start us off, tell us a little bit about your career, how you got here. We have a lot of students in the room. So they're really curious about where you started and how you started your career and then how you got into this area of AI.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, pleasure to be here. I actually got this. USC is very impactful for me. It's a big part of my professional career. I actually was a Honeywell tech 35 years. Actually, with electricity. But yeah, I was a Honeywell tech, and I used to ride my loaner bike around and fix the air conditioners. So that's where I got my start in the HVAC, environmental controls business, and then I kind of worked my way up. And then along the way, I started getting interested in energy efficiency. I did a stint at PG&E for a minute, and then left and founded my first startup company in 1997. 5 startups later, doing AI.
Tell us a little bit about your company. Just give
us. Buildings are very much optimized. I mean, buildings use 40% of all the electricity out there, and they routinely waste 30% of that energy. And it's been like that for 100 years. So, it's kind of about time we kind of advanced technology of buildings, and I got this idea a few years ago. Prior to this, in 2005, I started another company that had nothing to do with the environment. It actually helped policing and the CSI work. So you've seen those fancy screens on CSI where there's a correlation engine and it shuffles through all the DNA and all that stuff. That stuff is all fake. None of it is real. So I
ruined it for us all.
Yeah. This is great mock-ups, but I mean it's all fake. And I started a company in 1995 called Shield Ops, and it was to use AI to actually get into helping law enforcement, put bad guys in jail. And I actually went to Universal Studios. I was actually the HVAC technician there, so we had installed some stuff, and I I went and pitched the idea to the producers of CSI, and they bought it, and then they actually formed an episode around it. There's a link to it on my website. Yeah, we actually produced it. We showed the first real CSI AI correlation engine in history on CSI in 2005. So that's how I got my start in AI. And then, it was years later that I started wanting to apply that to the buildings that are energy efficient. So that's how they converged together. I started AI 4 years ago.
Hollywood's building energy efficiency. This is an interesting trajectory.
Yeah,
Good. We're gonna come back to that. But Sabrina, do you want to tell us a little bit about your?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I love that story. Yes, I think I will go back even further into my childhood for what brought me here. I used to grow hot peppers with my grandmother, and she was really creative in doing that, and she worked a lot in bringing soil to health, between soil and dirt, and she was actually working in soil. And she actually taught me this sense of community around growing food. And I did a lot of work with her and other members of the community that were living in Linwood and Compton at the time. Just going with her to share the bounty that she was growing. And so that really started me on the path to thinking about food, where it comes from. I think every child should have that experience because it was really formative for me. I did not become a farmer at that time. Out of high school, a year actually, and started out thinking I was going to be an architect. And I did get that degree, but I did not become an architect. I saw the 105 freeway tearing up neighborhoods as part of my senior project, and I asked residents there, how did this happen? How can we stop it? I was super naive about things at that time. And they said, well, if we had a good lawyer, we might have had some different outcome here. So I went to law school. And while I was in law school, I started working on community development. And out of that, doing a lot of social, legal work with residents in 40 states. I had clients in 40 states where I was doing community organizing. And when I was doing that, this is what finally brought me back into growing food. We had residents that were not allowed, and many of them still are not allowed, to grow food at their apartments. So we had a policy change at the federal level to allow residents to grow food. So doing that, I realized, wow, food is really important. And it was something that I was still growing my own food and doing that sort of thing. So I stopped doing policy and I went into farming. And our first project was down south of here in Normandy in 54, where we started having workshops and growing food there. And my child and I went to a makerspace, and I learned how to code. And I thought, this is kind of awesome. I'm super old, but I'm learning how to code. And we created a precision irrigation system. And it was making a huge difference. We started growing more food. There's 300% increase in production at the site, and other places were taking it. And at the time, I was running a nonprofit that I founded. And so I wanted to keep that going, but there was no funding to do it here in the United States, funnily enough. So I ended up taking the project to Cuba. And that's where it was an incredible learning experience for many of you know, obvious reasons. But just learning about regenerative agriculture and permaculture and really bringing that to bear on what I was doing. So we brought the technology back, and volunteers that wanted to use not just precision irrigation, but we were learning about soil health. And we had this sensor that we were just messing around with, and it was giving us that data. That was really great. and serving as baseline for how to improve the soil. And so we started seed from that 4 years ago, February 2019, but it's almost 5 years ago now. And we are certified B Corporation, scored higher than Patagonia. And not a competition, but we are democratizing access to this technology. So we're making sure that smallholders and underserved farmers in some of the most immediate hottest environments in the world have access to technology that's accessible, affordable, and allows them to impact the climate in their communities, because agriculture has a very direct tie-in to environmental pollution. So we're working with growers and residents in urban and peri-urban areas so they can keep the health control.
Wow, those are really, really inspiring stories. And I want to dig into the details of both of your companies and what they're doing on the independent front. But before we get there, one of the things that really just stands out in both of your stories, whether it's Hollywood to building energy efficiency or law to just so many different things that you've done. You've made different jumps in your career, and I think about we have a lot of students in the room, and we're all coming from different backgrounds, and so I'm wondering, how did you get interested in this space, and how did you AI is an intimidating subject. So if there's people out in the room that are interested and they have big ideas and they want to solve problems and they think AI might be a good way to do that, can you talk a little bit about how you nudged your way into this space? Because you guys are really on the forefront of how to leverage this technology for good, other than stealing, leveraging our private data.
I'm sure. I mean, I'm always fascinated by the story, the legal story behind it. Like you mentioned your background, I bet you have 3 things in common. I don't know. I grew up in KGB. What else?
Well,
what elementary?
Rosecrans.
Okay. What elementary school?
Well, I actually went to Union School, which was at the Linwood Southgate.
Okay.
So
I went to Budlong.
Okay.
My parents, I heard she mentioned about the 105 freeway. My parents were actually displaced for the construction of the 105. They lived in 118 in Wilmington. And I too wanted to be an architect when I first started out in the career. So I said all that to say, sometimes you don't know where life is going to take you. And I think it's all about taking advantage of the opportunities as they come to you. So, I mean, I really wanted to be an architect. Like I almost got my degree in architecture, and I dropped out of school and started getting my associate's degree. I was, really disappointed in you, things. And I really wanted to go in. It was 1987, and I really wanted to go into computer science because do things, computers, technology. And so, but that never stopped. The basis for me wanting to go into architecture was my love of buildings and structure. So that's where that came from. And then Honeywell came to call me after I went to a trade school. And, they're like, what do you know about Honeywell? And I was like, well, I got this little round thing that controls the heat, in my house. And we're much more than that. And then, I started out my career early on at Honeywell Tech, fixing, stuff here. And I learned that I was just fascinated by the mechanism and the automation aspect. So that's where the AI. The basis of AI is algorithmic anyway, and building control systems. That's all they do 24/7, 365. It's an algorithmic, proportional control. It's called. So I always enjoyed, the mathematics and the algorithmic nature of it. And it's really AI at the basis of it is pattern recognition. So there's a lot of early underneath to that. And I guess I just saw AI as an opportunity to do a lot of the stuff that I wanted to at scale and beyond what I could do as a human, trying to do mathematics. That's not fascinating.
And just really quickly to kind of follow up on that, could you give us like a tangible sense of what you're talking about when you think about algorithms to optimize energy efficiency? So like, what kind of data are you thinking about? What kind of variables are you leveraging? Just to give, you know, a sense of what you're actually working on.
Okay, yes, and it's pretty straightforward. I mean, the problem with air conditioning is that the load always changes. So it'd be great if when they design the air conditioning system, it was made for literally 65 degrees outside. It's like the balance point of the building. It's called the balance point. So it's 65 degrees outside air temperature. You're not heating or cooling. The building is just kind of like equilibrium. It's a perfect 72 degrees. You know, it only would like that in here. So the moment you go above 65, now you're trying to cool the building down. And now the moment you go below it, you're trying to heat it back up to come the rain. So there's a lot of moving parts. And I quickly learned that, yeah, it's very challenging that's why people are always cold and hot and we're wasting 30% energy. So in my mind, you know, an algorithmic approach, AI was a perfect way to attack this problem, because what you're really looking at, AI is kind of, I like to say it's the little person sitting in the thermostat constantly adjusting for varying load. I mean, you know, that's pretty much what it does. I mean, you've all had experiences where, you know, I'm cold and then the person comes with their ladder and they set the ladder up and I can fix that, you know, and then they go up there and they actually close off the damper a little bit. That's what they're really doing. Right? They're saying they're fixing it and they're just like, they're closing off. And do you feel better? Oh yes, it's so much better. You know, I'll see you 6 months from now when you're breathing, you know, and then they gotta open it back up. So it's the twice annual, you know, visit from the HVAC company. And really, to be honest and not to disparage the controls company, but they don't get to send the person in the truck and roll trucks at a $600 service cost. So there really isn't any incentive really to fix this problem, because it's maintenance.
I have a few offices for you.
It's
Wearing a
huge
winter
problem.
jacket in the middle of August.
It's a
and
huge
feels
problem,
wrong.
and huge energy waste. I mean, and it's very.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, about AI and equity and your path there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting when you say the word intimidating about a lot of this. And I mean, again, as I mentioned, I started doing this much later than a lot of people that I come in contact with. And I think what we forget is that computer science, the formal, the natural sciences, they're not elusive or exclusive for any of us. We are, you know, I'm guessing most of us got here in some kind of conveyance. Maybe you made it yourself or you used some machine with a card to get here. I mean, we're using technology every single day, very naturally. You know, it's pulling us along into this future. And so if you really think about just every single day, as someone did this too, you're using math all the time. And I mean, it's very cliche to say that, but it's true. We can all agree on that. So I don't find it intimidating. I do feel like I used to call myself a Luddite, you know, using that word completely wrong, I found out. So thinking that it meant that I didn't like technology, but finding out that the original term was a bunch of folks that were just angry about the technology that they weren't having access to. So that really frames some of the work that we do in terms of access and democratization of what we're doing. And so for AI, what I love about it is, I mean, I'm all in on it for the company because it really is helping the folks that we work with who are totally underserved, have never had access. It's improving their lives. So practically, how is that happening? We have a lot of non-English speakers, and we can actually get baselines and predict what's happening at their sites and have it translated. I mean, it's not just the way that we might be using the actual sensor to give us some data and some information back. It's the human side of it and how it's making our job a lot easier. And training. We do training, I said, down the street at the space that we have. it's actually allowing us to build upon basic training. It's very simplified. I'm sure it's going to get even more complicated as we go down the line with it. But right now, we're manually giving it information, and it's in degree, how we've done things in the past, we make mistakes. So I'd say on the human side of it, it's really been imperative for us to bring it along in the.
And, you're kind of, as you speak, have all of these ideas about, agriculture is just in the context of climate change, is such a hard issue. And it feels like there's so much data out there, the humidity, temperature, you've got soil moisture, etc. I mean, can you speak a little bit, if you have all of the successes in the world and what does this look like in the future? Like, what do you see in terms of the potential of this technology, even if it's beyond seed? How can this help low income urban farmers?
I mean, specifically in agriculture, it's amazing, the predictive models. Agriculture is all about how can we predict how much we're going to grow, and a lot of it. And so being able to assess what's happening in your soil, what to plant, how do you think the kind of baselines, not just for us, but for there are 500 million smallholder farmers around the world that have no access to this information. So I see it really tapping into the needs there, outside of us. But also, I think, again, there's this risk that people will be afraid to enter the space. So it does that other thing too, where you're able to, I don't mean just translate languages, but translate information in a way that's digestible and understandable also to will, work with it. And that's desperately needed in the agriculture space.
Smart. Thing that you're addressing this gigantic problem of building energy. So I have a 40. And as we talk about decarbonization, we think about electrification, we think about optimization. There's so much low-hanging fruit here, but you've had this long career in this energy industry.
Demand.
Yeah, and can you talk a little bit about where it was, when you started versus where you think you can go in terms of potential?
Well, it's just, and I do want to say for anyone who's thinking about going into AI, I'm going to demystify AI. It is really not that complex. Okay, most of the time, so let's take a use case. You want to figure out what the perfect setting is for that thermostat. And they're really only like between the comfort range, it's really like 70 to 76, right? So the problem is that the outside air temperature is varying as you go along. But imagine if someone said, look, I want you to find a perfect temperature, perfect setting for this room at every degree outside air temperature. And you've got 1,000 years to do it. You could just sit there and measure the outside air temperature and set it to 70 and then 71, and you can make a log of that. That's all AI is doing. Scientists call it successive approximation. We call it trial. That's what machine learning is all about, is hanging around long enough and gathering enough data so that once you learn a particular setting or pattern or whatever, I mentioned pattern recognition earlier, it really isn't much more than that. We haven't achieved the general intelligence yet, AGI, true intelligence. And I know this because when ChatGPT first came out, I said, man, I can't wait to test this thing. I wrote an AI engine, from scratch. So I got on it when it was in the first week, and I felt my testing thing. And I said, what is 4 plus 4? And it said 8. And I said, no, 4 plus, my wife says that 4 plus 4 is 9. And my wife is never wrong. And you know what it said? It said, you are right. Since your wife is never wrong, 4 plus 4 is 8. Yeah. So, garbage in, garbage out. It doesn't happen, it's innate, you know, there's all kind of, I just like going around with this thing, you know, so I was sitting here asking all kind of possible questions, you know, go get me a bucket of steam, you know, how much does it weigh, and all that stuff. You know, that's what I do, that's my crossword puzzles, but anyway, don't be intimidated by it. Don't be intimidated, just, if you, what AI and machine learning does is it compresses time. So it's making all these computations so quickly that, you know, you can do a year's worth of work and you can actually watch it. Some of the fascinating videos that Microsoft has on their, it's called Project Bonsai. And it's based on TensorFlow. But you see this thing and it simulates, like one of the ones I love is it balances a ball. Like there's this Moab machine and you know, John, you see it. But you're basically, you're trying to teach, the AI is trying to learn how to balance a ping pong ball on this platform that's moving. And you just see the thing, like it takes it 9 minutes to learn how to balance the ball. So it goes on there and it tilts off, the ball falls off, and then it just starts going faster and faster and faster. And it does like a, you know, 6 months worth of balancing of the ball in 9 minutes. You just see it. And then it says, okay, I now know how to balance the ball. Download that program to the actual physical device, drop the ping pong ball on there, and it can balance. So it's really about time compression and iterative learning. In fact, that actually is what we use in our company. It's called ILC, which is iterative learning control for trial and error.
I mean, I just want to jump on that because this is exactly, when I talked about our site down south, I'm just going to talk about micromediation.
Yes, please do. I was gonna ask you.
But we started experimenting with mushrooms because they're the heroes of the soil and mycelium highway that's in the soil that's bringing it to health. And so we used our sensor because our sensor is a carbon sensor. And our first goal when we started with the sensor was to calibrate and align it with USDA's National Soil Database so that we have ground truth information that is aligned with the remote sensing that's out there. And so when we were doing that, we realized we want to remediate the soil. What are some of the ways that we could do that? So remediation meaning we wanted to make sure we were removing petroleum, lead, excess nitrogen. And we started working with these mushrooms, oyster mushrooms, on the site, and we had dirt there. That was remediation. And so we were using the information from the sensor as a baseline and just doing this over and over, and so the iterations were happening. And what it did was it allowed us to decide which species to actually put in the soil with, I mean, very quickly. It would have taken us, yeah, exactly. And so we have this forest there now with 16 species, 3 of them pioneer species, that is allowing us to actually look at our field in this new way of remediating the soil. So, I mean, we wouldn't have gotten there without having some sort of iterative process.
So I want everyone in the group to start thinking about their questions. We're going to see questions in the room. We're going to see questions online. But before we get there, we have a lot of really entrepreneurial people, young people in this room that have really good ideas. And again, maybe the AI isn't intimidating, but the thought of getting out of college and starting your own company or pursuing an idea, that's an intimidating thing. You guys have done some intimidating things in your career. And I'm wondering, can you speak a little bit on both of your respective journeys of, getting from your not so humble beginnings to, where you sit now as a CEO? Do you have any advice for the young people in the room and the older people in the room, please?
I mean, I think what's really key is you can have a big idea. We have big ideas from when we're 2 years old all the way up, and big ideas, nothing without people. And so I was just asked this last week about this idea of how leadership is being this content, and I think that it all comes down to having some empathy and really understanding, the learning that you're entering. And I always say being curious at the same time, open to learning, but really we even, part of our work in the Certified B Corporation is, we have to account for a lot of things. And one of the biggest things that we're proud of is that we have strong partnerships with stakeholders. And so always considering that word is meaningful to us, stakeholder. And so within our big idea, we're always looking at how the community that we think we're serving, that's how we walk into the work that we're doing. How is that community a partner with us? And I think once you've got that framework going, it's all looking ahead.
I definitely agree about the team aspect. I think a lot of folks, kind of, no other word to use, but we need kind of comes in to play. They'd rather own 90% of something small than only 2% of something huge. You can't do it alone. You're not gonna, I'm not going to say you can't. I'm sure there's like some outliers out there, like 1 in a million that can do it like you said. But you need a great team. You need like-minded individuals, and it's going to be tough. I mean, not everybody is going to be cut out to be an entrepreneur. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. And I keep on doing it too, I'm 62 years old, like, whenever you're gonna stop. I mean, but it's that you've got to really keep going. And 2 pieces of advice. One, you can't doubt. So for a while, when I was working for Honeywell, when I was working on Johnson, I did it part-time. And yeah, there's nothing, you're not risking anything. I got my regular paycheck coming in such that it is. When you start out on your own, like if you don't work, you don't make money, you don't eat, so there's a lot of, you gotta really commit and go for it. And then the other thing is really understand that you must absolutely hold your vision. Other people are not gonna see what you see. And if you're not, and 3, if you're not the CEO, all you have is an opinion. So you got to be the CEO. Every single time that I started a company and I wasn't the CEO, it went off the rails. And I'm not saying that's not because of me or the other person who's wrong. It's just our visions didn't align, and I saw something that I always tell people, like, you want to be in charge and run the company, start your own company. Really got it. You're gonna have so many naysayers. This is not gonna work. That's not gonna work. You keep on going.
It's a certain kind of craziness, actually.
It is. It's a sickness, right? But no, I mean, seriously, it's vision. It's vision and just thinking about stuff in a different way. I mean, I really love the story about, you can say, started out with your parents and see my journey into smart building started out as a kid. Like I was like 7 years old. And my parents got me and my twin brother like the World Book Encyclopedia, right? And I remember it was like, 12 people with monthly payments of $29. Like it was like taking out a mortgage, right? We're investing in this encyclopedia for your future. And then me and my brother, we promptly started taking the encyclopedia, the World Book, and turning it into like buildings and stuff. We're stacking them up on each other. Start playing, And my mom comes in and she says, what are you doing? You're not reading it. And we're like, no, I made this neat building. And look, I had these Hot Wheel tracks stretched across the buildings, and then I had my Hot Wheel car came up and I opened it up and I go, look, Mom, the car is smart, and it told the building to open up the door. One of these days buildings are gonna talk to cars and they're gonna be smart. And she's like, I didn't buy it for you to build buildings out of books, but that little spark was really the start of my vision for making smart buildings, and it started when I was 7 years old. So it's something that I'm very passionate about and always have.
Yeah, as we need to mention, it takes a certain amount of crazy. I think I read that your company started in 2018.
Yeah.
So you had COVID come the next year
Right.
while you were trying to, can you speak, I mean, that's an
We're both like speechless.
This is very close to home for me because I had another company called Phoenix Energy Technologies, and I actually had incubated a couple companies at USC. So I'd been away for like 10 years because I started Phoenix back in 2009. And, you know, I incubated it at USC. USC was my first customer for my last company. And I stayed away, and it was February of 2020. I know where this is going. I came back to have lunch with my buddy over in facilities, Craig. And he's like, "Keith, what are you up to?" And I haven't seen you for 10 years. And I said, "I got a new idea. I'm thinking about trying to apply AI to facilities." And John Welsh at the time, he's retired now. He was the executive vice president of facilities. I've known him for 30 years. He said, and he got this big wide-eyed look, and he's like, "I don't believe this. We have this partnership with the LA City on smart building technology, and I want you to come and run it for me." You know, so I said, "That's great. I really appreciate it. I'd like to have a contract. You know, I'm going to start a new company." And he said, "Great." And that was February of 2020. I went back and promptly resigned from my position at my old job. Had the contract all lined up at USC. We're going to do the same thing, and boom, COVID hit. Nothing happened for like a year. I'm like, I've always done this. I started a company in September 11, 2000, September 9, 2000. Then I started my next company, Phoenix, in 2008, right? I'm reading Elon Musk, his autobiography right now, and he said one thing I love. He said success in business is a trail of destruction. He said every day is like people laugh at Elon about it, you know, how many rocket ships he blows up and stuff. But there's that guarantee, he's gonna keep blowing up billion-dollar rockets until he gets this stuff right. So yeah, you definitely have to have a lot of creativity.
Yeah, failure is part of it, and a lot of people don't tell that story.
Total,
So thank you.
total failure.
I was just gonna say about the pivot that we did in 2019, because we did start in February 2019 when we were incorporated, and we were focused on precision irrigation, like I mentioned. And we were with a really, really good position at that time with LA Incubator. So we were being incubated at the time, which was really actually a silver lining kind of action for us, because we were developing the product, and they actually helped us with our first pilot. And so the pilot occurred, we jumped right into that. And that pilot is actually where the sensor came out of, because in 2019 we had this precision irrigation, this little, well, it was actually a small kit that went in yards, but we, you know, that were pivoted to this other countertop kind of precision irrigation for little plants, because we were looking at homeschoolers and things like that. And so we put the technology in a countertop kit so that people could grow vegetables on their counter, herbs, I should say, on their counter. And while we were doing that and bringing in a little money so that we could get traction, we were doing this pilot, and we stuck this sensor in the ground, and it was starting to tell us things. And we started calibrating it, and we realized, what, this is where we should be going. We should be looking at carbon in the soil. And so we actually took it as an opportunity to test out a theory. And by the time we were solidly into 2020, we were really in it, and we had the funds from Lacey so that we could kind of coast through without too much damage.
Wow. So I'm hearing crazy, grit, ability to pivot.
I've actually got a quick story about that. One of the things we learned out of this, it's always a lesson. Adversity, success comes out of that. One of the things we learned on my old company, Phoenix Energy, we had 16,000 buildings connected at that time. It was the largest building control network like ever created. We had all of Best Buy, Office Depot, Home Depot, Cinemark. Like you go to any mall, my old company was probably controlling all that stuff. The only problem was we had a room full of call center technicians doing that. So one of the things that happened during COVID, no one in the buildings industry ever anticipated having to turn the buildings off. It took them 4 to 6 months to turn all their customers' buildings. because of the sheer scale and volume of going onto the front end workstation and manually turning the lights off and manually turning on the AC. Now they wasted millions of dollars. So that to me is like, wow, AI, it could do that at scale, you know. So that was and that became a great one of the performance indicators that we wanted to get with our system is to be able to put the building into mothballs or put it to sleep really quick.
Yeah, I was living here on campus during the pandemic, so all of these guys went home, but I stayed,
Oh, yeah.
and the buildings were very cold.
Yeah.
Summer of 2020, the
Yeah.
buildings were still very,
We
very
literally
cold.
couldn't turn them off.
Yeah, absolutely. I was here to witness it. So I want to make sure, what questions do we have from the crowd? Just raise our hand. I don't think we need microphones. We also have some online potentially questions. I think I saw your hand up. Phil.
Sure, I'm curious about the sensor that you're using for the car, like, and how applicable that is, like, wide scale, like, it's, you know, it sounds like, I work in agriculture and regenerative ag, and just kind of curious about how that scales up.
We are specifically targeting folks with 5 acres or under. So that's when I talk about that 500 million smaller farmers. That's really the key demographic. So it's a handheld sensor so that they can actually walk their sites and use it, get their baselines and that sort of thing. But certainly, you know, the idea is that they would aggregate that information over several sites, different people. But it is specifically targeted to that smallholder acreage.
Quick follow-up question, sorry guys, just like with that data, is there a way to like compile that data so that that part can be kind of a bigger piece of the puzzle of okay, so,
Yeah, absolutely. We can talk about that later. If you'd like.
love to.
Thank you both for talking. It's very inspiring to hear from you. So I want to go into climate tech venture capital once I graduate from SC. So speaking to you both on the funding front, how has it been for raising from traditional VCs rather than climate focused VCs? Like any challenges, benefits? How has it been with your experience? Yeah.
Any with a capital A. Yeah, just quickly, many challenges, and I think it's getting better as folks understand what the social impact space is like and how it can actually bring profit, but that's taking some doing and telling the right story. It'll get better, but right now it's not there.
Yeah, we had folks, SVB, so I mean, we had a lot of shell shock in the venture capital world. And I mean, I think what happened was we were right in the middle of trying to raise our pre-seed round. You know, I've done this several times. And I mean, AI, energy efficiency, carbon reporting, I'm like, seriously, the poster child for being able to raise a small seed round. And we just couldn't do it. We couldn't get it done because all the VCs were looking for what's called in the industry a unicorn. Like they didn't want it. It didn't matter if your business was, only a $500 billion business. Like they wanted, $10 billion. It's like, well, it's not quite that big, but it's still pretty darn big, And so it actually worked its way out because we were advised to just kind of bootstrap ourselves and grow. And that's pretty good now that now we are actually have achieved some traction. We got some family friends investments, and we got some revenue. We started focusing on sales and revenue. So we kind of swapped it around where we for the first time in a startup company, I did not raise a VC-led round, and we actually have grown organically because we were forced to. And I mean, I did a pivot a year and a half ago. I'm like, we're gonna stop trying to raise money. We don't need it. And so we just started selling. So we started bringing in revenue, and now we're at the great place. Our cap table is really clean, and a large percentage of that. So it's a great place to be.
So I have a question for you, Sabrina. And first of all, thank you to both of you. I think the work is great. And I like how you described AI as accelerating the time frame. We're talking about climate change. So I've got about 12 or 13 years working at the intersection of soil health regen and climate change, and we do a lot of work with data. And I'm in full disclosure with a company that creates sensors and stuff like that. But you said something that really caught my interest. One of the things that we do around the world is we try and create that photograph up there, right? Turn the land from the left to the right. And we do that doing a lot of what you said, which is coming up with the right cocktail for the right piece of land to bring the health of the soil back. And I'm curious, your story about the mushrooms, I found fascinating. I'm wondering what you're doing with that, and if you're plugging any of that into larger databases to leverage AI at a broader scale.
Yes.
So can you talk about that at all?
It is such a super long answer, and I'd be happy to talk with you after about it, but yes, we are leveraging, that was part of the remote sensor. Part of the discussion that we're aligning with that, calibrating to it. But part of our goal was to start looking at specific pollutants in the soil. So because we're looking at urban area, we start looking at petroleum and lead. And with our sensor, we started trying to figure out, well, were there certain inputs that we could make to improve the soil based upon our baseline carbon number. And so we have specific work with the carbon number that is informing some of the remediation strategies that we're coming up with.
Primarily from a contaminant standpoint.
Yeah.
I have 1,000 questions.
Yeah, I know, and I'm kind of, I would totally love to speak with you about this. too.
I think I like to add, put a different spin on it. We talk about random acts. I keep talking about patterns. Things are much more ordered than we realize. I think again, people just don't sit around long enough to gather the data to see the pattern. And I'll give you a great example. This isn't with the climate change, but this was with the CSI company. We helped the Orange County Police Department become the most successful police department in Florida. Interpol keeps records of all this stuff. So we put 500 bad guys, like these are murderers, gangbangers, all that stuff. We actually made a difference in society. We put these guys in jail. And what we found out, if you literally call it, there was a random act of violence. Is it random? Nobody ever looked at it. So we actually found a pattern to murder. We actually had our AI was actually predicting in a 4-block radius where the next, murder might occur. And it had a 72% accuracy. We found out there's a process to going through this, and real briefly, without the gory details, but gangbangers, before they commit a random act of violence, they tune their weapons up. So the first thing they do is they shoot in the sky, then they shoot at an inanimate object, then they shoot at they'll hit the mailbox, they'll shoot near the mailbox, then they'll hit the mailbox, then they'll shoot near a person, and then they will shoot a person, and before they're ready. It's very gory, very terrible. But we found that it was actually a counterclockwise spherical pattern. They start way away from where they're going, and it actually went in counterclockwise pattern. So shots fired in the air, you put that on the map. Shots fired near a mailbox hit, person almost hit, person shot. You can actually, there's a pattern, because what they want to do is they want to do this stuff away from the intended target, and they're actually triangulating where the hit is going to occur. Like I said, very gory details, but we did a lot of good because I refused to believe that these were random acts of violence. They were not. It was a pattern.
I have a quick question that kind of is linked to that story of, I think, one of the biggest fears and one of the things that I hear most when people are talking about AI is jobs. And so when you're talking about working with the police department and working with farmers, what has been the response? And what do you think the conversation needs to be in terms of helping mitigate that initial fear that people have with AI?
Yeah, so it's immediate irrational fear right away. We had so much pushback from the police department. You know, I've been a police officer for 30 years. I don't need no stinking AI to tell me how to do my job. And really, you want to think about it as a force multiplier. It's going to help you do your job better. So I love the quote from I think her name is Deborah Lapp from IBM. She's a scientist, chief scientist of AI. She said, managers are not going to be replaced by AI. The managers that use AI are going to replace the ones that don't. So it's not about taking jobs, it's about making the ability to a small police department, Santa Ana Police Department, Orange County, they had 7 CSI folks, 2 gun examiners, and one field person. And we put more bad guys in jail than any precinct in the entire world in 1 year. We got 500 hits, which is astronomical because of the AI. And that system is still at work, by the way, in the Orange County Police Department. So yeah, it's a force multiplier. It's not going to put anybody out of commission except maybe the bad guys, or maybe we'll be able to grow some more soil, or maybe some plants, or maybe we'll be able to have better efficiency.
And I would just add that, you know, what we're seeing is that it's creating efficiency. So again, back to the people element of it, one of the really happy outcomes was that people had more time. For instance, I totally worked in Cuba. People who have more time away from the field now, I mean, they have a great educational system there, but in some communities, this allows, especially women and girls, to go back to school. And so I imagine, you know, the scale, like in some countries where agriculture is just, I mean, clogging folks down and they're, you know, unable to actually do anything except grow their food. This is a real opportunity for some of those things to take place.
One quick note about efficiency. People always think that efficiency means less. It means doing more with less. That is literally the definition of efficiency, is power into a system versus total output power. So, you know, talk about controlling buildings. It takes a certain amount of energy to cool this room down to a comfortable point. It's not about trying to cheat or have people uncomfortable or cutting the AC off, which is what 90% of people do. No, it's about actually cooling the building off at a more efficient level. So you're actually doing more work with less energy. So efficiency is a gain, not a loss.
So the two of you guys both mentioned the numerous companies that you guys were started. I was just wondering how you guys know, like, when to cut your losses or new ones, things like that, perhaps when to know to start moving on with an idea that you've been working on.
I mean, so I don't have Keith's background with for-profit companies necessarily, but before I started seeing, I was primarily in the nonprofit world. And there, the 2 times that I shuttered something was because I felt like I had achieved what I could, and the people had taken it on themselves. So it was very clear there that I wasn't necessary anymore. With this, as we talk about things being, you know, it can be so tough. And I think I have for myself, I mean, there's some compulsion. I don't even understand what it is sometimes, but at this point, I feel like, again, the stakeholders that I'm working with are so oriented towards it moving forward. And I have the resources to do that. If I didn't have the resources, I think you asked me this maybe in a few years and I was kind of dwindling down, I might have a different answer. But I think resources are definitely the biggest part of why I would keep going.
As a serial entrepreneur, I can answer that question very clearly. I keep on going in my companies until one of 3 things happen. I sell it for, you know, 7 to 8 figures. I get kicked out of it, or I crash and burn, like that. One of 3 out.
Any other questions?
Hi, hi, thank you so much for this. This has been enlightening. I would love, if you could clarify on that crash and burn. As an entrepreneur, and especially as comfortable, as we get with, or we're trying to get with failure, how do you decide when to let go and move on to the next?
That's a great question because, unfortunately, is we don't learn sooner.
Yeah.
We hang on to it because it's your baby. You started it, right? It's agnostic. I mean, you grew this company literally from scratch, and it's worth multiple millions of dollars. You're employing maybe 100, 200 people, and then the thought of somebody coming in and kicking you out of the company or crashing your journey is very painful. Yeah. So I'd say it's just sometimes you're just forced out. And I mean, just situations happen. 9/11 happened, so no IPO. Pandemic hits. No, I lost that contract.
Yeah.
So I mean, I just kind of keep plugging along. I think what gives me great joy and keeps me going is that I love what I'm doing. So the money, yes, it's great to be able to feed my family and pay my mortgage and stuff like that, but I love what I'm doing so much. I'm going to do it no matter what. Absolutely. I'm going to keep on. That CSI company, I worked on that for 3 years. The technology ended up getting sold to a high tech CSI type company. I got $20,000 for 3 years worth of work that I didn't get paid, but I earned a lot, and I had a heck of a time.
Oh, man.
It's a compulsion.
Yeah.
So discerning between the business and the mission and understanding that a failed business model does not mean that the work stops. Like you're saying, there's a whole bunch of ways of doing which one.
Yeah, he Musk talks about that in his latest book. He says success is just a string of failures. It's perpetual failures, over and over and over. So you cannot define whether or not you're heading towards success because by the number of failures you've had.
Thank you.
Timekeeper, so.
Yeah, one final question coming in from the Zoomies. So how can, how specifically is AI looking at drawdown and especially in the ag sector? So this is probably more for you, Sabrina.
Again, because we're working with our sensor, it is a carbon sensor, so I'm looking at you, but.
Yeah.
So we are actually looking at, again, baselines for soil carbon. And that is really volatile, which is why we wanted to create a handheld tool so that we could, over time, have just individuals be able to measure as often as they wanted to, so that they could use artificial intelligence, machine learning, to inform some of the strategies that they would take. So essentially, it is all about the baseline and having something here, and then as you go on in time, understanding how much how much carbon is being sequestered in soil. And so that's the work that in terms of drawdown and measuring that, it's based upon that key line item of the baseline.
Similar for my business, amazingly enough. I mean, it's all a matter about heat content inside the building and how much you can take that heat away. It's a heat extraction thermodynamic. So yeah, same thing, baseline, deviation from that baseline, sloping where I want to be. Right there.
Well, I think we're at time.
Yeah.
Sabrina, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And also thank you to the Jacobson family for sponsoring it, making this all possible. We have feedback cards too as well, so we love your feedback. We're always seeking to improve what we're doing. And stay tuned, follow us on social media, of course, and so we'll be in touch with our next series as well. Thank you.
Guys.
Yeah.